Unit 731 was a secret facility for biological and chemical warfare research established in 1936 by the Imperial Japanese Army. Its official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, and it was housed in the Pingfang district of Harbin, Manchukuo. Headed by General Shiro Ishii, a microbiologist and high-ranking officer, Unit 731 became a hub of some of the most extreme human experimentation in the service of creating humans as instruments of biological warfare, designed to create widespread impact and permanently alter Japan's wartime strategy. The scope and brutality of such operations remain a chilling reminder of how science may be used as a weapon. The unit targeted mainly Chinese civilians, but it also included Koreans, Mongolians, Russians, and prisoners of war from Western countries. The individuals were highly dehumanized and deprived of any identity or name, but were referred to as maruda, a Japanese term meaning logs. The usage of such a term was to further the false narrative that Unit 731 was no more than a lumber mill, making the prisoners mere objects and facilitating the detachment needed to conduct the inhumane experiments. The extent of the suffering, the range of the experiments, highlighted the operation's relentless pursuit of military advantage without regard for human life or international law. The researchers intentionally infected Unit 731 prisoners with deadly pathogens, including bubonic plague, cholera, typhus, and anthrax. Injections, spraying, or food and water contamination were the ways that such substances were administered to them under the guise of developing vaccines or medical treatment. The diseases were then allowed to take their course, carefully charting symptoms and internal damage. Routine live dissection without anesthesia was conducted to examine effects on organs during life so that observations were not affected by post-mortem alterations. This was done without anesthesia so the accuracy of the medical data would be sustained, showing these men were thoroughly committed to results without regard for human ethics whatsoever. But the brutal methodology far exceeded the limits of disease research. Frostbite experiments were used to see how human skin and tissue would react to extreme cold. Limbs were submerged in freezing water or put through harsh winds until the tissue had frozen solid. Then, the frozen limb would be struck and the damage measured, and the next step would be to try various ways of thawing, everything from rapid reheating over a fire to more gradual warming. These sets of experiments had the purpose of extending military knowledge for any future warfare that might be conducted in cold climates. They show just how practical wartime concerns fueled such extreme cruelty. Those examining the reaction of the body under high-pressure chambers were the prisoners next in practice. This involved a chamber whose pressure was increased until the eyes popped out or the organs ruptured. Data such as these were considered necessary in developing air combat strategies and pilot safety. Other experiments included the injection of victims with horse blood, salt water, or toxic chemicals, just to witness the after effects of doing so, revealing how medical experimentation at times surpassed anything humane. This is not all. The research of Unit 731 did not stop within the walls of the building. Field experiments were conducted testing biological weapons on a large scale. For example, as early as 1940 and 1941, Japanese aircraft distributed ceramic bombs infected with plague-carrying fleas over Chinese cities, including Ningbo and Changde. These intentional acts led to outbreaks that killed thousands of civilians, demonstrating the effectiveness of using disease as a weapon. These field tests underlined the capability of Unit 731 to deploy biological warfare into real combat situations, a huge development in military tactics and an ominous increase in the human cost of war. These were complemented by contamination of local water supplies and the distribution of deadly bacteria-laced food. The contamination did not stop at the targeted communities but extended to the general public, enhancing suffering and instilling a climate of fear among civilians. Various historical estimates account for 300,000 to 500,000 deaths due to biological warfare experiments by the Japanese Imperial Army. The widespread suffering underlined Japan's preparedness for unconventional warfare, leaving nothing unexplored in dominating its adversaries. This clashed starkly with international treaties like the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which outlawed the use of bacteriological and chemical arms. For Japan, though a signatory, these experiments were justified as necessary research for wartime. Support and funding flowed from the Imperial Japanese government, justifying it as a necessary military advantage despite ethical concerns. These experiments became a part of the wider strategy to develop weapons that could be deployed against Japan's enemies, which is a ruthless extension in developing military capabilities. As World War II neared its end and Japan faced defeat, General Ishii ordered the evidence from Unit 731 systematically destroyed. Houses were burned to ashes, several buildings were destroyed, and the remaining prisoners were executed, all so the Allies would not find any evidence. However, the legacy of Unit 731 did not disappear completely. In 1949, the Soviet Union held the Khabarovsk war crimes trials and brought to trial those Japanese personnel they had captured. Testimonies about experiments and atrocities at the trials in this city were very sensational. However, the sentences handed down were mild. Most received short prison sentences before being discharged. It was in stark contrast to the attitude of the United States. The American government, realizing how much value could come from the data that Unit 731 had compiled, negotiated immunity in return for access to the research findings. A decision in which General Douglas MacArthur played an integral role weighed the strategic gain during the Cold War against the trial of people for their war crimes. The deal allowed Ishii and hundreds of his subordinates to evade punishment and return to civilian life in Japan, where a number found prestigious jobs in medicine, academia, and the corporate world, participating in building post-war Japanese society free from accountability. Such protection for Unit 731's personnel by the U.S. government was due to Cold War geopolitics. In this Cold War setting, scientific and military advantages were far more important than the question of justice. In fact, the data from Unit 731 contributed to bioweapons research, positioning the United States strategically against potential threats. A decision that left an enduring stain on the historical record and breeds resentment among victims and their families to this very day. No justice was left for survivors, while officials who committed such acts lived freely. The recognition of Unit 731's activities in Japan took decades and faced significant resistance. For quite a long period, this subject was neither included in the school curriculum nor publicly discussed as a way to hush up this dark page in history. It wasn't until the late 20th century that survivor testimonies and historians started to expose what really happened at Unit 731. In 2002, the Tokyo District Court formally acknowledged that Japan had conducted biological warfare. This was one of the few instances of formal acknowledgement. Public confessions were made by former members of Unit 731, as well as Hideo Shimizu, to corroborate survivors' accounts by giving full details of the experiments conducted. These admissions added significant pressure for acknowledgement and provided further evidence of the inhumane practices that took place. Ironically, the Unit 731 site in Harbin today is a museum that stands for remembrance and witness to the atrocities. It exists both as an educational tool and as a stark reminder of what possible results can arise from scientific pursuit without control, solely for military gain. The history of Unit 731, though minute in comparison with other atrocities committed around the time of World War II, such as the Holocaust, is just as prominent an example of the human cost of wartime ambition. It is the hope of the curators at this museum that future generations will understand something about the ethical responsibility of scientific research and military strategy. The story of Unit 731 is a grim reminder not just of the human rights abuses of yesteryear, but more appropriately, of a warning to show that ethics related to scientific research must be integrated into the core. If you found some value in what I said, please subscribe and comment below with your thoughts about this topic. As always, sharing history is the only way to create a more knowledgeable and caring world.